All right, we are back at it again for another edition of Spooning a Bear Book Club. Believe it or not, we only have two more sessions after today. But on today's talk, we're going to be talking about chapters 17, 18, 19, and 20. So we're covering four chapters, but if you haven't read them, they're super easy. They're super, all four of them are really, really short, only maybe 2 or 3 pages long, but they're just little stories about some of my misadventures when I was working at the Bear Center. So I will dive right into the discussion today. And so we're going to explore chapter 17. And the title of that chapter is The Bear That Wouldn't Grow. And so if you read that particular chapter, it's a story about a bear that came in during the 1997 hard mast failure. It's a jargony word. The mast is simply another term for the acorn crop. The hard mast is the acorns and the nuts. Soft mass is in the summertime with the berry crop. But that particular year, 1997, we had a hard mast failure or an acorn failure. And when that happens, it's really, really hard on most animals because a lot of them really depend on that food source. But it's really, really hard on bears because acorns are one of the best energy, um, like just nutrition laced foods that a bear can consume in the fall when they're getting ready to go into their hibernation. They go through that phase, that feeding frenzy that we call hyperphagia. And for the most part, they're feeding nonstop on acorns. And in 1997, it was such a bad mast failure throughout most of East Tennessee. There was literally not many acorns or other nuts to be found within the mountains. When that happens, it really stresses the bear that the bears that are trying to put on pounds. And bears will kind of go searching far and wide to try to find some nutritious food sources to get ready for that their winter's sleep. And when that happens, when bears begin to travel quite a bit, they tend to get into more trouble because they're going into unknown territories that they've never been, and they encounter more and more hazards. Obviously, one of the biggest hazards is roadsides because they can easily get struck by vehicles. But encountering other bears, encountering dogs, and encountering people is what happens when they go in search of food. And so in the fall of 1997, lots of bears were coming out of the mountains, getting themselves into really bad predicaments, and we got this crazy influx of cubs. And now keep in mind, up to that point in time, the Bear Center had only taken in just a couple of bears. You heard about Katie and Zero being the first bear. We really didn't have many cubs to take care of up to that point. And suddenly, I believe it began in September of 97, we got a call about an orphan cub. A few days later, we got two more cubs in. Then a couple days after that, we got another cub, then two more cubs. And before I knew it, I had 13 cubs on hand at the Bear Center in just over a month's time, which was crazy because we were scrambling trying to figure out how we're going to care for these. And um, it was quite a frantic time at the Bear Center. Now, we typically get these bears in, um, and a lot of them are pretty small bears, anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds. And back then, whenever we got a bear, we would kind of name it after either the location it was found or the circumstances it was found. And so we got this little cub in that was discovered along the freeway, and I can't even remember which freeway it was, but we're like, oh, that's a really good name. Let's nickname this bear Freeway. And he was, or she was, pretty much just like every other orphan cub we got during that time period. They're all anywhere from 10 to 20 pounds. And I believe uh, when she first came in, she was just like all those other bears. And so the cool thing is the bears' bodies are designed to pack on weight, especially this time of the year. And so typically we pour on all the food as much as we can, so the bears never have to worry about finding enough food. And the cubs grow quickly. And a number of the bears would come in weighing anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds. And within a matter of a couple of months, they're going to be weighing 40 or 50 pounds. And we try to get the bears out as quickly as possible, knowing that the longer they stay at the bear center, the more likely they are to become habituated. So we want to get them out. We don't want to hold them any longer than we have to. And so we started feeding all those bears, and all the bears were growing except one cub, and that cub was Freeway. And it actually got to the point in time where some of the cubs that we got in that September, October time period, after a couple of months, they were already of weight that we could start releasing them. And then you look at this other bear, which was the exact same age, and she was still only about 15 pounds. And that worried me. So I called in Dr. Ramsey, who was the head vet at the University of Tennessee Vet School. And they came in to examine her to see if she was fine, if she had any type of ailments. They even checked her for heavy parasite load. They gave her medication. There was nothing that would indicate there was something wrong that could be fixed. And Dr. Ramsey said, there's really nothing. We could just try to keep feeding her. But the longer and longer she stayed, again, we didn't want to just have a bear that just was a year-round resident at the center. So I believe it was probably 4 or 5 months afterward, and we were down to only two cubs left in the enclosure. All the other cubs had already been captured and re-released or returned to the wild, and the only two cubs that remained, and I don't know why I'd never clicked this. I should have showed you the picture. Um, this was actually a picture of Freeway and what she looked like. And so she came in looking like that, and about 4 or 5 months later, she was still looking like that, while the other cubs have plumped up. And so we're down to only two bears left in the enclosure. It was Freeway, and then another stinking little bear, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. The other bear was Houdini, who had escaped me previously. And Houdini, by this point in time, after being able to keep keep Houdini within the enclosure, packed on a fair amount of weight. It was well over 40, I think closer to 50 pounds. So they were ready to go. Houdini was ready to go out the door, but looking at Freeway, she wasn't ready. And so I didn't really know what to do. And I called up Kim Delozier, who is the head biologist at Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And I'm like, Kim, what do we do? We have this bear. We've had it for 4 or 5 months. Came in weighing 15 pounds and only gained 1 or 2 pounds. And all the others had gained 30 or 40 pounds. And I told him Dr. Ramsey had already checked her out and kind of gave her a clean bill of health, but she was just tiny. And we really didn't know what to do. And the only thing Kim could conclude was she was maybe the runt of the litter. I don't know if you're familiar, but sometimes mammals, when they give birth to multiple offspring, there's one that kind of just doesn't have what it takes, and it's usually the smallest of the litter. And that was all Kim could conclude. And so we had a little dilemma on what to do because we could not keep her at the center. Um, and so Kim said, if it's okay with you, I'll turn her loose. We'll hope for the best. Obviously, she knew how to be a bear. She was just really small. And so we made the decision of pairing up Freeway with Houdini, and we are going to release both of them together. The hope was that they would stay together, and actually, my next talk will address that a little bit. But it was, I guess, what you could say is it was our way of feeling a little bit better about this bear's release. And so, I don't know exactly what month we ended up releasing Freeway, but we took her and Houdini out into the middle of nowhere, Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and we let them return to the wild. And so, man, if if there ever could have been a mascot for the Bear Center, that one would have been great. But that was an oddball. I wanted to ask any Tori or Greg, is Katrina on as well? Have you guys ever heard of a bear that just stayed small, or known of any that were just really tiny?
We've had them, Katrina's actually she's visiting a friend in Ohio today, so she's not joining us. I tried to get her to. But we've had some that have been runts for sure in the past where, they struggle to really put on
Yeah,
a whole lot of weight. And a lot of our followers would know that usually it was ones that came in late in the year. And we've had those ones that have come in during poor mass crops or for whatever reason they're the runt of a litter of three or four and the mom gets hit by a car and you'll know because you'll get all three of the siblings and three of them will be 20 pounds and fourth one will be 10.
yeah,
And I caught some in the park that had to end up being euthanized. And maybe Dr. Ramsey couldn't have figured this out back then, but we had one this year that was very runty and we didn't have any explanation. They did some blood tests and they saw elevated liver enzymes. And because of some of the research we've done in the last couple of years, we've had some grad students who have done baseline blood testing to figure out what all these blood values for bears should be. The vet school now has a really good baseline of what a healthy bear's blood levels are and what a emaciated bear blood levels are. Well, Dr. Julie Sheldon, who replaced Ed Ramsey, she was like, that bear had elevated liver enzymes. They were off the chart, but otherwise seemed healthy. So we kept it indoors and dewormed and fed and they were like, before you put it out in the enclosure, bring it back. We want to test it again, see if those liver enzymes balanced out. Well, it had put on some weight. It had gained weight, but we were feeding it a lot. This was late in the year. It was November, and um, the liver enzymes were still off the charts. So they did some imaging and they found out it had a bile duct stenosis. This was just last year, and the only explanation was it was a genetic defect. This bear was born with a very narrow bile duct, and because of that narrow bile duct, it wasn't getting bile, into its digestive system. It wasn't able to digest fats very well, and therefore wasn't able to absorb them and gain weight. And so that explained probably why it was so runty. And because we were feeding it so much rich food, yeah, it was putting on weight, but we decided to euthanize it because of the genetic defect. It was like, hey, it's not going to make it once you put it out there in a wild environment. It's just going to, starve again. And so they did say, we could put a stint in this bile duct. We could stint this bile duct and open it up, but then you risk it passing on a genetic defect you don't really want passed on in the population. So we did end up euthanizing that bear. But there's been some runts, and Tori would know of some of the runtier ones in the past. We released at 40 pounds in the
Yeah.
winter, and they put on as much fat as they can, but their frame just doesn't really grow out. And I think if you keep them through the spring, you see them hit another little growth spurt. I've seen that with some of them, but as far as what you were explaining, that's pretty crazy because you said, I mean, you had it there for at least a couple months, right? You got it in the fall, and you must have been releasing it, what, two
yeah,
months later or so, and you
yeah.
didn't see it gain a single pound.
And I think I got to check the records. It either went, I think it went from like 15 to maybe 20 pounds, but would
Yeah.
never went over 20 pounds. And it was just crazy because all these other cubs are coming in and same size or potentially even smaller and just like bypassing this cub in growth. And she just never decided to grow. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
in
Go ahead, Tori.
2020 we had very similar, I think, to what you're describing, Daryl, is it was she was from Kentucky. She was Bear 318, but her name was Marmalade, and she had three other siblings, and her mom and her siblings had all been hit by a car, and so she was the only survivor, and she was the runt. And so when she came to us, the biologist had told us she was the smallest one and she was 10 pounds. And I just looked it up to see when she got in. She got in end of July in 2020 and she was 10 pounds. And we didn't release her till February of the following year, and she was 52 pounds.
Yeah.
And she was
Wow.
just small. Like she was just, and I remember we similar like on the cameras, but we kept going back to like we knew that she had three other siblings that were larger, and so I think she was just the runt. But yeah, so we do
And
see that.
10 pounds isn't really terribly
Yeah,
small for July. 10
right.
pounds in October, like we had, last year we had an 8, 9 pounder in October. And he was wormy as could be, but
Yeah,
he only still by January was 37, 34 pounds. And he was as fat as he could be, but the frame just wasn't
Yeah.
growing. And I think you need to get back to that spring, to get the hormones working again to promote growth. They'll pack on the fat, but in the winter, it doesn't matter, I think, how much food you give a bear once they've got adequate fat. Their metabolism, their whole body is going into torpor, and they're not going into growth mode, as
Yeah.
far as bone mass and frame, and muscle.
Well, I appreciate that. That was the first time I ever talked about that with anyone else that had experience with it. So I enjoyed that conversation. So
Yeah, and,
that,
and
that
Daryl, there's one other. I'll bring this up. I know I love telling my stories. Sorry, but
no,
there
that's
was
good.
one other one where so Dr. Julie Sheldon, and she's one of our board members and she's a wonderful veterinarian. Ed Ramsey says she's better than he was. So, but Julie has done a lot of research projects with our bears to just figure out, hey, what's wrong with this bear, even if it has to be put down, especially if it has to be put down. And one of the cubs I brought from the park was a sibling of three, considerably runtier than the other two, and the mother had been hit by a car. And they said, Tori, do you remember this one that had rickets? They said it was like the bear version of rickets, had really flexible joints.
Yeah, I think
It was in December.
yeah, yeah, I do.
So there was three of them. Two of
Cranberry,
them, is that what? Okay, two
I
of them
think.
were
Peppermint
two of them
mist.
were in the 20, two of them were in the 20 pound range, 20 something, and then the one was like 12. And the one that was 12 wouldn't really gain weight, and it had really flexible joints. And they said it had like the bear version of rickets, and it was just failing to thrive. And it wasn't gonna. And they euthanized that one, but they did some testing to discover rickets in bear cubs. And so we do have the advantage of finding out some of these things that are known to science and other species, and especially in humans, that probably occur in bears, and they're just they're part of nature and life. Like, it's things that are not compatible with thriving in the wild, and we find them because of what we do.
And I think that it highlights one of the great benefits of the Bear Center. Besides doing the rehabilitation and the education, research was going to be a primary tenet of what comes out of there. And it's great that we have learned so much about bears because of the work that we do at the Bear Center. So, all right, I'm going to jump on to the next chapter, chapter 17. I promise to show the picture this time. Um, this next one, again, really short chapter, but it's called Homeward Bound, and it just it's another story about Houdini. Houdini, if you don't recall, was the bear that escaped from me like one of the first bears I got in, and I lost it. But it ended up being recaptured. I had inadvertently left the door open to the building that I had Houdini in, and he disappeared. He had the crazy thing is he had a surgically repaired hind leg. He had a broken hind leg that they um, put a pin in, and so he wasn't in the best of health when he escaped, and he disappeared from the bear center. And I was completely torn up over losing this bear, and a long time, maybe about 6, 7 weeks passed by, could not locate the bear. And then Kim Delozier called me up and said, "Hey, bear, hey Daryl, would you happen to recognize a bear with a shaved back end in Chimney's picnic area?" And that was where Houdini originally came from. And I was like, I was in awe. I was like, no way. And so when you look at where the Bear Center is located compared to where Chimney Top's picnic area is, if you draw a straight line, it is 22 air miles. you know that bear did not walk a straight line. He obviously more or less walked that crookedy line. I just made up that line just to give you an idea of how he probably wandered all the way back home. And so way, 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 way more than 22 miles was probably walked by that little cub to make its way back home. And we thought it was absolutely amazing because this bear was only 6, 7 months old when it made that journey from the Bear Center back to its literally the exact point where it was originally captured. I don't know. I don't know if anyone knows how an animal can do that, exhibit that homing instinct, but they do. And in fact, I mentioned it before. This little case study, we put together a little poster presentation and we presented it at one of the bear workshops to demonstrate the homing capabilities even exhibited in cubs as young as 6 months. And so it was a phenomenal story. And one of the things that comes out of this, now I'm gonna well, I'm not gonna contradict myself, but the lessons we learned here is I imagine many of the followers, they follow these cubs that are brought into the center the whole time they're at the center. And you can see these bonds that are formed by the cubs at the center. They will hang out with the same group of bears, and a lot of people will just consider that, oh, they've become friends with these other cubs, which are completely non-related to them because they're in this close confinement. And I don't know about you, Greg or Tori, but I know when I was there, a lot of people would ask me about why don't you release the bears together? And so one of the things that this Houdini episode showed us is that individual bear has this tremendous homing instinct. It wants to go back to where it's from. And so we use that as an example, not when we were releasing them, unless there was other circumstances dictating that we couldn't take them from where they came from, we wanted to get them as close to their home as possible when we released them. We didn't want to take them completely different area because when you move a bear, and there's been more and more research coming out, when you move a bear, it's only a matter of time before they try getting back home. So if we were to take two cubs or two or three cubs that kind of hung out together at the bear center and release them all together, if you're moving some of those bears into an area they don't know, more than likely they're not going to stay together. In fact, I think a lot of the radio collar work shows that they might hang out for a little bit, but then they're going their separate ways. And so we try not to take it too far away from its home territory unless, like I said, situation dictates it. Uh, because when an animal, or especially when a bear is put into that foreign area, they try to walk back home, and by trying to find their way back home, that's when they get back into more trouble. Again, you're crossing so many different roads and streets where they can get struck by vehicles. They're entering the territories of multiple other bears, and depending on the time of the year, those other bears can be very territorial. And so again, because of the lessons we learned with some of the previous bears, it helped dictate and create a better way for us to do the rehab. So that was one of the cooler stories of an unfortunate event with the bear escaping from the bear center. But man, we learned a lot, and it was just so enlightening to find out what a small cub will do to try to get back to its home territory. So, any other neat stories from you guys as far as the homing instinct?
Yeah, I liked reading this chapter, Daryl, because that is a question we get a lot still. And I would imagine we'll continue to get, especially too about siblings. And we do release siblings together because they
Yep.
came from the same spot. But to your point about the radio collar thing, I'm pretty sure Coy's, and I don't know the exact number, but Coy's study back in 2015, 2016, any siblings that were released together ended up separating after, I want to say like 24 hours. I don't know if that's the time that is actually the quoted thing research he found, but it was very surprising, especially when you're watching them, like you said, on the cameras. They're laying together, they're playing together, so it seems like they're just thick as thieves, and then it's very weird to imagine that just kind of flip.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Some of them, Tori, I believe some of them stayed, in the area, like close
Mm,
siblings. Like two of them, I remember for sure that I helped release were two males in Cades Cove, and they did separate, right away, but they both denned up, you know, less than a half mile from each other, and
mm.
they were both around the next year in that same area. They actually, which is interesting for young males to stay in the same area. And that was why you probably remember, Tori, the picture of the one male breeding a female in Cades
Yeah.
Cove. That was one of them.
Oh,
He
okay.
he stayed right where we left him, and he was
Hmm.
seen 2 years later. People were able to get a picture of his ear tag, and it was that bear that was released, and he was breeding a female. And so that was interesting to see. He stayed put actually in that range where he was originally caught after his mother was killed. But we have had some crazy movements with the relocated bear project stuff, Daryl. If you've seen any of that data that Kristen Botts put out, with the GPS collars on some of the relocated bears, you'd see some of them make
Yeah.
the beelines back home, and then some of them do huge circles. But the roadkill rates, especially when you move them north of the park, north of I-40 into more developed areas in northeast Tennessee, the roadkill rates were much higher than if you move them south. And it really just a product of those huge movements and the number of roads they end up crossing in their search to get back home.
Yeah.
I-40 being the big one, though. That I-40 stretch through the Pigeon River Gorge, it takes out a lot of bears, regardless of if they're moved or not in a year. But the relocated bears had a 10 times greater likelihood of being hit by a car on I-40 than a resident bear. In the I-40 corridor that we caught and collared as controls. So that was really interesting. And it's a great educational piece of data, right? People um, don't really think about bears being hit by cars as much as they are, but boy, it's huge in this region, and a lot of roads, a lot of cars, a lot of bears.
Yeah, and it used to be common practice like decades ago. Relocation was a very common practice with most state wildlife agencies. If
Yeah,
there's a bear getting in the garbage, they trap the bear and move it 20 miles away, 30 miles away, 50 miles away. And the thing was they weren't collaring those bears. And so a lot of times like they never heard from the bear again, so it was
yeah,
originally thought, hey, it was a success. We took the bear away, never got into trouble again. There's probably a good chance a lot of those bears
oh
really
yeah.
did not
I,
survive. And so what the latest study, isn't it upwards, wasn't it like 70, close to 80%?
Were
Um,
unknown in
yeah,
that. Yeah, so that was Parker White building on Bill Stiver's thesis work before Kristen did the GPS work. And in Parker White's analysis, he found that 81% were unknown outcomes. And of those ones, 500 something bears relocated from the Smokies from the 50s all the way to 2015. And then 2015, we started GPS collaring and relocating. And so what we found with the GPS collar data, and I can't quote Kristen's data 100%, but she just presented on it at the workshop in Kalispell, and about 50% were harvested. I know that for sure, but I want to say the roadkill rates were in the 20 something percent, and it was all, well within the year. Nearly 60% of the bears or more were dead within the year. But harvest was still higher than roadkill or euthanasia or depredation, and especially if you isolated the males. Males were nearly 80% harvest, I think, of the ones that, and nearly every male was dead within a year of being relocated, because if they weren't harvested, then they were killed for depredation. they were euthanized or they were hit by a car. Some of the female bears did survive multiple years after being relocated and usually made it back to their home range and survived back in their home range. But the roadkill was still, I think, the second highest cause of mortality behind harvest, and all within months of being moved. So it's not a magic solution. The only thing I can say from my professional experience and opinion is if you're going to move a bear that you're not worried about the level of conflict that it's causing, I think moving a large male bear to an area that it could at least have a chance to be, a contributing bear to the ecosystem still. And if it gets harvested, that's not the worst thing in the world. But euthanizing, some of these male bears that could be at least an animal people use after harvesting, is, less of a sustainable and tolerable solution. If you're going to say, well, don't relocate them, euthanize them all, in this Smoky Mountain region, you're talking about euthanizing a lot of bears, and people will not tolerate it. And it's not a remedy. Relocation is not a remedy either. But saying that, well, you can't move them, just euthanize them, isn't
Right.
improving the situation. It's saving you some time and some effort, but that's not really fair to the bears. And the people, the constituents can at least use a bear that's being harvested during hunting season legally. So I err towards that for those conflict males if it's likely that that's the case.
I have a question for you, which I thought about. I don't know the answer, but as far as the homing instinct, bear going back to where it's from, what do you think is the mechanism that guides them? Do you think it's scent? Like, how do they
Oh
navigate?
yeah, man, Daryl, I I answer this question usually jokingly. I say they either have a magnet in their brain or they do smell their way home. I lean towards the scent,
Okay,
but man, maybe there's some kind of crazy magnetic sense in their
it's
brain. Electromagnetic fields. I don't know. Um,
well, learning more and more about like lots of animals that migrate use some of the magnetic stuff. What's super interesting, and I'm going way off on tangent. Um, Whenever you see the red foxes and they're pouncing on the animals in the snow, like when they hear a mouse underneath the snow and they do that big jump and pounce.
right.
There was actually a study done that says they're significantly more successful when they're oriented towards the north, which is crazy, but you can look that up.
Yeah, and
So,
aren't they supposed to have like with the whiskers can sense electromagnetic fields or
yes,
something, right? Like cats can do and stuff. Yeah.
it's crazy what we're learning, and just imagine what we don't know right now. So, anyway, okay.
Anybody else out there in the audience have a idea of how bears find their way home? I'm open to any serious or non-serious answers because I get that question a lot, and I always defer to either some kind of crazy magnetic thing or they smell their way back, and that's just how good their noses are.
Yeah,
So,
I could see like some of those maybe 20-mile movements or whatever, but man, when
yeah.
there's some bears that come back from 50-mile adventures. So
Yeah, Mary Lou Kopensky here says GPS. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt there's bears out there with how much they've been rating people's stuff. There's probably a bear out there with an iPhone. Maybe he's figured out how to use it. So, but yeah, also that's funny you said, Daryl, with the 20-mile thing. There are times where I think, a large male bear has such a huge home range. If you don't move him far enough, you're not moving him out of his home range.
yeah.
So, yeah, it makes sense. 20 miles, yeah, they can find their way because it might be well within their
Yeah.
range. But, 50 to 100, which I've seen them cover the 100-mile range, that's, it's not in their range. So,
Yep.
that's pretty crazy. Trish says topographic memory clues. I don't know anything about topographic memory,
Well,
but
I think what she's referring to is you could see a mountain range in a distance.
oh, right, topography, navigation
Yeah.
type. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So and
Yeah,
you
that's
can
how
see
I
that.
that's how I find my way around
Yeah.
in the mountains.
That's how I navigate. So. All right, let's move on to our third installment today, the semi-naked bear. Um, Believe it or not, I'm gonna show a photo of, I believe this was Houdini once again, but I did not have a picture of this particular bear. So if you read the book, this chapter 19 was about it was actually about like some satisfaction I had from within because I had made the really, really difficult decision of leaving the Bear Center and pursuing further in my career as a wildlife biologist. And one of the last bears that I took in and took care of was a bear by the name of Hyatt. If you're familiar with Great Smoky Mountain National Park and Cades Cove, one of those roads that cuts across the middle of the cove, one is Spence Lane, the other one is Hyatt Lane. And so this particular bear came from Hyatt Lane, and Kim had brought me the bear, and I can't even recall how it had a broken leg, but they had to insert a metal rod in this bear's back leg. And so when we received it, fresh out of surgery, had like, yeah, I don't know if you can see it well in the picture. This is when the hair on Houdini started growing back in, but half this bear is shaved. You can see the longer hair up here, and then when you get to the midpoint of its body down here, it's the hair is much shorter. But when I got Wyatt or Hyatt in, he was completely shaved his whole bottom half because they did this surgery. I remember he even had that yellow betadine coloration to it from trying to sterilize that area. And so Hyatt did wonderful. We had him or her, I can't even remember what sex the bear was, but had it for a little while, getting along great, can climb, could use the leg fully, put on enough weight to release it again. And so we went there and we released the bear back on Hyatt Lane. Again, we try to take the bear back to its home turf. And that was one of the many times that I was interviewed, and the reporters always ask, "Aren't you sad when you release the bear?" And it always surprised me because I tell them the release is one of the happiest, exciting times for me because the sad part is when you get a bear in to your possession and you see it laying there all sutured up and broken legs and that's the sad time. When you're releasing a bear, that's the happy time. And so it never saddened me to release any of the bears. That was the day I was looking forward to. So we had released this bear back into High Lane, ran off and disappeared just like a good bear should. And then a few weeks later, I made that decision to leave the Bear Center. And so it was a really difficult decision. It was one of the greatest jobs I ever had. But I remember it was one of the last times I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a ride through Cades Cove for the last time until I don't know when. I didn't even know where exactly I was going to end up. And I remember cutting down Hyatt Lane, and off in the distance, I see one car pulled over. Usually, when you get stuck in a bear jam, you are behind 3,000 cars for like 2 hours. But I saw one car pulled over, and a gentleman was outside of his car with a pair of binoculars. And so he was looking up in the trees, and I figured he was looking at maybe some kind of bird, an owl, whatever it was. And I pulled over and I asked what he's looking at. And he's like, there's a bear up in that tree. And he's like, I swear I must be seeing things or something, but it looks like that bear has a shaved back end. Well, he even said the bear was like semi-naked up there. And that's where I came up with that title. And right then and there, it gave me the best feeling in the world. In fact, I'm getting goosebumps right now because I'd released that bear weeks and weeks before, knowing that the bear was still alive, still doing well. And I don't think the guy would have believed me if I told him that I took care of that bear, but it was just such a really cool feeling. And I
Yeah.
think it was like one of the greatest send-offs for me after leaving the Bear Center, knowing that the work I did rehabbing these bears and returning them to the wild, it was not only doing good for the bears, but it was doing good for my soul as well. So chapter 19. So, um, well, I was gonna say I was gonna ask a question to Greg and Tori, but you guys with the radio collars, it's easier for you guys to track the bears. Back when I was doing a lot of the stuff outside of Jay Clark's radio collar study, which he collared not, 11 bears. Outside of that, we put an ear tag in their ear and we released them, and that's the last we heard of them. And so it was definitely a black hole. I personally enjoyed that so much better simply because I never knew. I didn't want to know if something bad happened. I always hoped for the best. But it was funny because most of the bears I released, I never ever heard from or knew what their fate was. So, all
Yeah,
right.
Daryl, I think that that is a good thing to know though, right? That
Yeah.
if you didn't have any evidence of any of these bears making it, you'd be like, man, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And knowing Coy's data showed a 65% 1 year survival rate on 40 plus cubs and yearlings.
That's very
The
similar.
yearlings and the yearlings had 90%. Really, the cubs, the 65 was the cubs. The yearlings were like 90 something. You
Yeah,
know,
and that's so similar to natural survival rate
right.
in many cases. So,
Yeah, and we had a couple bears that when I was in the park that I caught incidentally 3 years later. Might have had a trap set in a picnic area. I think there was one research bear caught one time, and it was a 3 year old bear from ABR that had been released 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and it was like, hey, it's still around 2 years later.
yep.
And if a bear makes it to 3 years old after being released at 1 year old, you did your job. If it makes it to five, you makes it to six, that's just nature, right? We don't really have much bearing, pun intended, on the bear making it, much beyond a year after being released from us because it's got to find its way just like any other bear out there. But, if they make it a year after release, then they're on every bit of a level playing field with any other bear
Yeah.
out there. So that makes us feel good.
Yeah. I think what made this particular instance so gratifying was it wasn't like a radio collared bear where I can go find out where it was. This was kind of like a random encounter weeks and weeks later, just running into that bear happenstance. So that was one of the cooler things about it. So all right, I'm actually kind of looking forward to this last chapter. Um, a soft spot for Bub. And I figured anyone reading this chapter, like just reading the title, you might think that there is this really cute looking cub called Bub, but that is not what this chapter is about. Actually, that's another picture of Freeway in case you're wondering. But most of the bears that we got into the bear center, obviously they're either going to be neonatal cubs or really young cubs or really tiny yearlings. And I'm a wildlife biologist, but I'll be the first to admit, yeah, a lot of them are really cute when they come in. I don't recommend cuddling with any of them. But the smaller bears can be really cute. You have a ton of people, especially most of your followers, that just fall in love with the way these little bear cubs look. Having said that, I wrote a little blurb, this soft spot for Bub, and Bub stands for actually two different things. It's either beautifully ugly bears or big ugly bears. And so, having worked with bears for a while, they don't always stay cute. Now, don't get me wrong, there's lots of big bears that are really good looking bears. But I've ran into a couple throughout my career that it's like, oof. And so I described two of these bears in chapter 20. The second one I described was a bear that we called Spur. And it was, I think it was one of the rare cases, and we probably wouldn't be able to do it again at the Bear Center. But we got permission from TWRA to take in this adult bear that was, they were guessing 4 or 5 years old. And it had been struck by a car on the spur, and it knocked the bear out. They did take the bear to the UT Vet Center. They checked it all out, could not find any broken bones or anything, but They just wanted to keep an eye on it in case it had internal injuries that weren't evident. And so they brought this 130 some pound bear to the bear center just for me to hold on to it for a week or so, just to make sure there was no injuries that we could not initially detect. And I remember they released it down into the bear pen, and I was worried. Our bear pens, or the bear center bear pens, obviously are designed to keep in bears, but most of the bears we keep in are pretty darn small, and this was a full grown bear. And he twisted the electric fence quite a bit, but it did its job. It kept him in. But I remember going down there for that week, going down and looking at him, and he was not a very pretty bear. He was a large male, like I said, about 130 pounds, and he was either recovering or fighting a small case of mange because his hair was really, really sparse. And he looked, if you notice, bears, if you throw a bucket of water on them, they're not nearly as big. Um, some of you may have even seen there are some pictures of completely hairless bears, which look like a horror show monster. They look really weird when their hair
I
is
call them chupacabras, Daryl.
yeah,
I think when you see it, a hairless bear is one of the scariest animals out there.
they are definitely scary looking. Now, this bear's spur was not like that drastic with the hair loss, but his hair was pretty sparse. It was midsummer, so they tend to lose some hair in the summertime. But anyway, Spur did great. We released him, and he went back to that area. Never heard from Spur again. But that was my first instance of wow, that bear is not the cute and cuddly kind. The second instance, and I'm so anxious to show this, was a bear that I nicknamed Old Grizz. And
Excuse
this,
me.
um, did someone say something? Okay. Um, I nicknamed this bear Old Grizz. Now, first and foremost, this was not a bear at the Bear Center. This was when I was working for TWRA. I was a big game coordinator for a while, so I was over deer, bear, and elk. But then I was chief of wildlife, and actually, I believe I did some of these studies when I was chief of wildlife because I just couldn't shake the passion for bears out of me. And so, one of the things that we did in Tennessee and a number of the southeastern states to to keep an eye on the bear population, we used to conduct what are called bear bait station surveys. Nowadays, they do these DNA studies, but back then, throughout the 80s all the way up to the early 2000s, we would do these bear bait station surveys. And all we would do is we'd hang a can of sardines, like lots of these sites all throughout the mountains, and we'd hang this can of sardines for about 4 or 5 days, and then we'd revisit the site to see if a bear had taken the bait. And the way we hung it in a tree, we made it primarily only accessible to bears. We had to make sure like a raccoon or a fox or anything like that couldn't get it. And so we would conduct these bait station surveys. The thing is, we use lots of wildlife biologists and wildlife officers to conduct these surveys because we are spread all throughout East Tennessee. And so we had to train new people all the time. And there's certain things to look for, certain ways to hang the bait station, because, like I said, you wanted to make sure other animals couldn't get it. But then when you revisited the site to determine if a bear had visited that site, you would look for tracks. You would look for maybe hair on the tree, some claw marks on the tree, the way the can was bitten into, or if the can was completely removed. So there was quite a bit of teaching that had to go that was involved to show them what to look for. And I thought, you know what? Instead of me writing this 3 or 4 page guideline on what to look for, it would be great if we can go out there, hang some trail cameras, get photos or videos of the
Come
bears
on,
interacting, of
come
the
on,
bears
let's go.
interact.
You did it! You did it! Come on in.
Hold on, I
I
got
don't have him ready. Cooper, stay.
Um,
It's Lisa Z there. Your microphone's on.
yeah,
I think you're telling your dog to stop. Uh,
I think I got him muted. Um, so I thought it'd be really cool if I could go out and hang some of these bait stations and set up trail cameras to show how these bears interact. And so I spent almost a week camping in Cherokee National Forest, trying to get really good videos of these bears interacting with the bait sites. And boy, did I have fun. But the coolest thing was I ran into old Grizz. Now, this is, if the picture looks grainy, it's because it is. I had to pull it off a video. So I didn't get a real good trail camera picture, but I got a good video. I got multiple videos. This bear was phenomenal. And I'm going to show you a video. So, Greg, this bear here, um, this particular bear was probably actually the one you see in the video here was probably at least 3 or 4 years old. It was interacting with the bait. It had just pulled this down the sardine can. But looking at this bear, in fact, let me rewind it. Look at the size of him. He's 3 or 4 years old. How you could actually see the string going up. He just pulled the can down. How much do you think that bear would typically weigh? This is an East Tennessee 3 or 4 year old, very
oh,
healthy male.
yeah, I'd say that the bear in the video right there is 125, tops. That's my typical 3 to 4 year old male's 125. 5 year old, you hit 150 to 175. And yeah, that's what I
That
think.
was exactly what I was hoping you'd say, because I guess the bear was anywhere between 100 125 pounds.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I'd say
so
125 would be the higher end. If I were to be
yeah,
catching that bear, if I were going to be darting him, I would say 125 tops. I'd dose him for 100,
yep.
and I know he'd go down. So, yeah.
So we'll go on the low end. Say this bear is 100 pounds. I'm watching this video and I hear this crunching of another bear approaching, and then here comes old Grizz.
Oh, wow.
Watch when he gets next to him. So if the bear on the right's 100, 125 pounds,
Yeah.
that other bear is easy 3 times bigger. He was a beast. And I got a couple of videos. I again I get excited over bears. I'm getting goosebumps. This would be one of those bears I wouldn't want to run into when you're camping, because besides being huge, he was all scarred up. He was battle worn and tested. I love the way he walks. When he walks away, you can see this
Yeah, the
lump.
swagger.
Oh
They
my
call it, he
goodness.
walks with that swagger. That's what Ryan Williamson in the park. He always
Yeah.
calls it a
Well,
swagger.
here's
Yeah.
his swagger. Look at that.
Yep.
So he was a beast. He was, yeah, he was the monarch of the Cherokee in that area. No doubt about it. And so, needless to say, I had so much fun with this study. Got lots of really, really cool videos. I should have added more videos because I got some really cool behaviors on there. Unfortunately, I ended up leaving TWRA before I was able to publish any of the stuff. We don't really use the bait stations anymore, but that was one of the coolest weeks I spent just experimenting, trying to get good videos of bears interacting with the bait sites. But he was a big boy. And so I have a soft spot for him. Most bears, lots of people love. They're cute and cuddly, but this is not a bear you you would want to snuggle up to. He was a beast.
Is
Yeah,
that
when
was
you
that normal to have them occupy the bait stations at the same time like that, Daryl?
The thing, Tori, when there's a lot of food around, bears tolerate each other. It's
Yeah, okay.
when food resources are scarce, then they become much more territorial. Obviously, if it's mating season, they become territorial. But animals don't want to fight each other if they don't have to. The only time they fight each other is if there's a reason, and it's usually food or a mate. And so I imagine midsummer there's probably plenty of berries. they weren't going to expend or risk getting injured.
Yeah.
Anyway, that small bear was probably too smart to even think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised, Tori, that it didn't run. The little one didn't run away though. Once he got, right up in his
Yeah,
grill,
you
I,
got
I
pretty
would,
close.
I would expect even when on a good food source like a big berry bush, expect a subdominant bear like that to flee.
Yeah.
The only thing I could think is, what if that was a female? That young bear. Maybe that's a female. Maybe it's a
Oh,
3 to 4 year old male. But my thought there is maybe that was a 4 year old female, maybe 5 year old female in her first heat cycle. I always tell people the hardest bears for me to tell apart are 3 to 4 year old males and adult females, because except for the head, it's pretty hard to tell, on the body. The head, you can tell if you get your hands on it or you're really close and stuff. But I always feel like those 100 to 125 pounders, they're either 3 to 4 year old males, or it could be a
you know
5
what?
year old female.
I never even, oh my gosh, I never even considered that. I bet you that's what that is because I was doing this study, I think early July, late June, early July.
Yeah. So she could have been in heat and he was courting
And
her. Yeah.
that's probably it because that if they're unrelated, I agree with you. The fact that that bear's not even paying attention to the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen the females when they're in heat, and you know what else the male is doing, that he's doing that swagger walk where he's got the wide spread legs, and he's really putting his pads into the ground, and
Yeah.
he's making those displays. And then she's just, in my opinion, I always joke about this. Female bears, when males come courting, seem to be just as uninterested as female humans are when guys show up at a bar, and she's just focused on eating.
Yeah.
And so I actually have a camera picture from the park, at a hog bait site, where there was a female bear eating the corn at our hog trap, and a male bear was trying to breed her while she was eating the corn, and she kept on shaking him off, and
Yeah.
she was just trying to eat the corn. And we thought that was the funniest thing. It was actually a little short video of her shaking this male off of her while she was just trying to eat. So that's what I kind
Yeah.
of
And
get there.
you see him sniffing right there. I'm wondering if he's kind of trying to figure out if she's
Yeah.
close or
If
something.
she's full, yeah, and then the females have that little scent gland. They put that scent down in the pads, and the males tend to sniff every little step she takes and stuff. And so, without the other bear acting defensive in the least bit or fleeing,
That's
that's
probably what it
my
is. Yeah.
assumption. Comes to
Yeah.
she's in heat and he's courting her. Yeah.
But yeah, the main reason I wanted to show that it was so great that they stood side by side because when I first opened this video after getting it, I'm like, oh, that's a decent sized bear. And then this guy walks in and dwarfs it. It's just like crazy, crazy.
Yeah, we would get a lot of pictures where people would have a 400-pound bear chasing a 100-pound bear in Cades Cove, and they'd say this mama bear was trying to catch her cub. And you'd look at you like, oh, really? Like, they're like, yes, the cub was way out front, and the mom bear's running after it. It must have done, and I'll be like, how big is the cub? How big is the mom? And they'll show me the picture. I'd be like, all right, so yeah, that's a daddy bear chasing the mom bear, and people would always think, oh, that makes a lot more sense. We were wondering why the cub was running away from mom. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I had such a good time with that camera stuff. I learned that bears will not leave cameras alone. But Greg, just so you know what I did, like I was having so much fun. I had a half dozen cameras with me. I'd hang the bait station, and then I'd put one camera on the ground pointing up, and so I would get pictures of the bears like walking over it, and
Hmm. You get the
and
different angles. Yeah, you just got to make sure they don't destroy your cameras.
oh, that was the other thing is I got a great video of a bear absolutely wreaking havoc on another camera. And so anyway, that was super fun. So anyway, I think big ugly bears or beautifully ugly bears need love too. So that's why I wrote that chapter. So anyway, with that, Tori, I'm right on cue. We just passed the hour mark.
Yeah, it's
So
perfect. It's
anyway, I
I
just
don't
wanted to thank you all for joining in on today's session. Sorry if we tend to ramble a lot. You get a couple bear biologists in the same room and they won't shut up. So
No, I think people enjoying it, saying
They're
thank
here for
you.
the
I don't see any
stories.
questions. So um they love the Bears and hearing about the Bears story. So
All right.
Yeah. And
thank
and
you so much, Daryl. Go ahead,
yeah,
Greg.
thanks everyone again for all your support on Giving Tuesday. We're really nearing the end total of our campaign, and this amount of money we've raised in less than 5 months is just crazy. It's unheard of. And we've been spending it just as fast as it comes in. Don't get me wrong, we're doing a lot of work there building that new facility, but we've got plenty of money to keep on making the finishing touches here to get back to having bears in the spring. So I just want to let you all know.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you. Our next meeting is December 17th, so 2 weeks, and we'll be covering chapters 21, 22, and 23, and then we have one more after that. So we'll
And
see you then.
yeah, the last one's on December
You
31st.
know, I just noticed that, so maybe
If
you
if
and
you want
Greg could
to, if you,
talk, and then maybe we can push that by, a
okay,
day.
we'll talk to everyone next week to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. I
Unless,
just
yeah,
realized that.
unless we wanted to bump it up and just do week, 1 week
Oh, yeah.
intervals,
Well,
right?
is
That,
that
So
that that
it's,
would
Christmas
be
Eve?
Christmas Eve then.
well, I meant a 1 week from now, bump
Oh,
bump both up, right? And we could do one next week and one the 17th.
we could do that.
We could bump them up like that. It's just the other thought I had was do one next week and do one the week after, and then we're
Yeah,
done before
well,
Christmas.
yeah, I will be in Buffalo, New York
Okay, no, no
with
worries.
Nate for
Just
work. So,
We'll do the 17th, and then by the 17th for everyone else on here, we'll have an answer for you for the last one.
yeah, we could pick some other day of the week, maybe even or something like that. Prior to Christmas, so
Yeah.
or just after, somewhere between 25th and 31st. So, all
Yeah.
right. Thank
that
you
All
sounds
right.
guys.
good.
Thank you guys.
I appreciate you guys. We'll
Thanks.
see
Bye,
you.
Daryl.
Bye, Daryl.
Bye.